Right, so we're diving deep today into Mark 8:34 to 38.
Yeah, the deny yourself, take up your cross one.
Exactly. And it feels like, I don't know about you, but everyone's heard this. Like even people who've never stepped foot in a church, they know that line.
Oh, absolutely. It's one of those, like you said, really familiar verses. So familiar, it's, well, how do you make it not sound like just another Christian platitude?
Yeah, how do you preach that? How do you teach that in a way that doesn't just make people's eyes glaze over because they're like, yeah, yeah, heard that one.
Right, right. It's like you want to bring that fire, that passion to it. But everybody in the room is thinking, yeah, I've heard this before.
Exactly. So that's what this whole deep dive is about. We're thinking specifically of, the pastors, the Bible study leaders out there, the people who are tasked with taking this sometimes well-worn passage and bringing something new to it.
Absolutely. Because you're the ones who need those, like, not so obvious insights, right?
Well,
You need something that's going to spark a new thought, even in somebody who's heard it all before.
yeah, they've heard all the Sunday school answers.
Exactly.
So what we've done for this episode is we've looked at sermons from churches all over, different denominations, different styles, different approaches, but all tackling Mark 8:34 to 38. And specifically, we've been looking for those unique interpretations, those creative illustrations, even some surprising historical connections they've been able to weave in.
Yeah, because it's not just about what they say, it's how they say it, right? How they manage to approach it in a way that feels fresh, feels relevant.
Totally. So let's jump right in. Why don't we start with why this passage is so tricky to preach on in the first place? I mean, like we said, it's familiar,
Yeah.
but I think there's more to it than that.
Yeah, there's definitely more to it. I think one reason it's so hard is we've reduced it to this simple idea of just giving stuff up for Jesus.
Right. Like it's Lent, you give up chocolate, and then you're good to go.
Right, exactly. You've checked the box.
But a lot of the sermons we look at, they went way deeper than that. Like
Yeah.
Peak City Church, for example, they really emphasized the shock value of the cross.
Yeah.
What it would have actually meant to people back then.
Yes. Their pastor actually used the Greek term. It's patibulum.
The tibular.
Yeah, it's the actual crossbeam, and it emphasizes the brutality of it, the humiliation. It wasn't this kind of, sanitized symbol back then.
Right, right.
It was an instrument of torture, a horrible way to die.
And that got me thinking, like, okay, what are the crosses for us, for our modern audience,
Right.
that carry that same kind of weight? What are we being asked to accept that feels just as impossible, just as, like, contrary to everything we think we know?
Yeah, that's good. It's not about finding exact, literal equivalents, right? It's more about finding the things that, finding what carries that same kind of emotional, and spiritual weight.
Yeah. What are the things that challenge our comfort, our pride,
Exactly.
in a way that actually feels like we're losing something precious?
Yeah, like it's a death. It's not just giving up chocolate. It's that feeling of this is killing me to do this.
Yeah, it's like death to your ego, to your desires.
Right. And that, leads us right into this whole idea of self-denial, which again, it's another one of those phrases that can turn into a cliche really easily.
Oh, yeah.
And several of the sermons, they really went after this.
They did. Calvary Bible Church had this great image. They used this analogy of a throne. They said, whose will is on the throne of your life? Is it you? Is it your desires, your ambitions?
Or is it Jesus?
Exactly.
Oh, wow.
And I thought, it's so simple, but it's so powerful. It's not just about denying yourself things. It's about denying yourself the right to be in charge.
Absolutely. It's about surrender,
Yeah.
but not like a passive surrender. It's active. It's a choice. It's like, who are you crowning king, so to speak?
Yeah, exactly. And that totally changes how you think about that phrase, losing your life for Christ.
Right.
It's not about actually physically dying.
Yeah.
It's about this radical shift in allegiance.
It is. And speaking of that shift, One Life Church, they used this football analogy, like this team that was so focused on individual awards and stats that they forgot to actually play as a team.
Oh, yeah, I remember that one.
And they end up losing the championship, right? Because they were so busy trying to be the star player.
Yeah, so focused on their own glory.
And it's easy to laugh at, but don't we do that all the time in our spiritual lives?
All the time.
We're chasing these wins that aren't really wins at all. I think that's a question every congregation needs to ask themselves. What are you pursuing?
That's so good. What are you chasing?
That isn't actually bringing you life. That isn't actually leading you towards what really matters.
And that's how we define winning, right? So much of our culture is obsessed with this idea of individual success, of material wealth, of getting ahead.
Yeah, it's all about like, climbing that ladder, getting to the top.
Yeah. But Mark 8:34-38, it's like
Yeah.
it takes all that and just flips it upside down.
It does. It says true winning. It's found in surrender. It's found in losing yourself in something bigger than yourself. It's in dying to self that you actually find life.
Yeah, and that's a tough sell.
Oh, it's a really tough sell in our culture.
But the sermons we looked at, they found some really interesting ways to make it compelling. And speaking of compelling,
Yes. Let's get to the good stuff.
the sermon illustration goldmine. I mean, we're all here for the good stuff, right? And we found some real gems. Like some of these, I was scribbling notes furiously. I was like, I got to use this.
Me too. Some really great stuff.
So let's rapid fire a few of them.
Okay, I'm ready.
Okay. So first up, Calvary Bible Church. They had this great contrast between self-care, which is like the buzzword of the century right now.
Oh, yeah.
But they contrasted it with soul care. They were saying true self-care actually begins with tending to your spiritual needs first.
Ooh, I like that. That's good.
I know. I thought that was such a good point. Okay, and then there was University Church of Christ. They had this metaphor about the second touch of Jesus.
Oh, yeah. Tell me about that one. Remember that.
So they were saying, like, Jesus, he touches us first with grace, with forgiveness, with love.
Right.
But then there's this second touch. It's the call to discipleship, the call to follow.
And that one might not feel quite so good.
Right. It might feel a little rougher. It
Yeah.
might be a little uncomfortable.
Yeah, it's the touch that says, okay, now you got to get up and do something.
Exactly. It's not just about being loved. It's
Yeah.
about loving others. It's
Yeah.
not just about receiving. It's about giving.
It's like the difference between, admiring a great artist from afar and then actually becoming their apprentice.
Ooh, that's good.
One is just kind of passive appreciation. The other is like, you're going to get your hands dirty. You're going to learn the hard way.
I love that.
Yeah.
That's such a good image. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, next one. Peak City Church. The pastor told this really personal story. It was about a car loan agreement he had to sign.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
And the point he was making was like, there were terms, there were conditions, there were things you just couldn't negotiate. And he linked that to discipleship. This idea that, like, following Jesus, yeah, it comes with amazing grace, but it also comes with certain non-negotiables. You can't
Yeah.
just pick and choose what you like.
I love when pastors use those kinds of personal anecdotes.
Me too.
It makes it so real. It's not just theology. It's like, this is how this played out in my actual life.
Right, and it makes you lean in, You're
Yeah.
like, okay,
Yeah.
what happened with the car loan?
Exactly. You want to know the end of the story.
Okay, and then for a lighter take, Wyro Anglican, their pastor, he actually brought a literal wooden cross on stage.
Oh, wow. Okay, I got to hear about this.
It was great. He starts talking about how inconvenient it would be to carry this thing around all the time, everywhere you go. Like, imagine trying to get on a bus with that or going through airport security.
I can imagine.
I got some good laughs. But it really drove home the point, Following Jesus isn't always pretty or comfortable. It's going to require sacrifice. It might even feel awkward or out of place sometimes.
Right. And that image of actually lugging that cross around, that'll stick with you.
Totally. And, that actually leads us to another theme that popped up in a few of the sermons, this idea of generational faithfulness.
Oh, interesting. Tell me about that.
Yeah, University Church of Christ, they connected this directly to Mark 8:34-38. They were saying, it's not just about our salvation. It's about carrying the torch for future generations.
Oh, I like that. So it's not just about our own individual faith journey. It's about recognizing that we're part of something bigger.
Exactly. Because it's like we're not just running our own race, we're part of a relay team.
Oh, I love that image.
Right. We have a responsibility to hand off the baton. What we do today, it impacts the faith of those who come after us.
That's powerful. It adds a whole other layer to the cost of discipleship. It's not just about us. It's about the legacy we're leaving behind.
Exactly. And I think that's a really powerful call to action for any congregation.
Yeah.
It's like, okay, what are we doing today that's going to make it easier or harder for the next generation to follow Jesus?
Yeah. Are we building them up or are we tearing them down?
Exactly. And, speaking of powerful examples, I was so intrigued by the sermon that brought in Dietrich Bonhoeffer.
Oh, wow. Bonhoeffer. That's a heavy hitter to bring into the conversation.
It is. For those who might not know, Bonhoeffer was a German pastor who actively resisted the Nazis. He ended up being executed for his faith.
Yeah, he was a powerful example of someone who lived out his faith, even in the face of incredible danger and opposition.
Absolutely. his life really embodies this idea of denying yourself and taking up your cross, even to the point of death.
Yeah, no kidding. He didn't just talk about it, he lived it.
Yeah.
And ultimately, he paid the ultimate price for it.
He did. And his story, it connects so deeply to the themes in Mark 8:34 to 38. It shows that it's not just theoretical. This call to discipleship, it can have real-world consequences.
Absolutely. And it's a reminder that following Jesus might cost us something. It might cost us our comfort, our security, even our lives in some cases.
It's a sobering thought, but it's also incredibly inspiring.
It is, because Bonhoeffer's story also shows that true faith is active, it's courageous, it's willing to stand up for what's right, even when it's dangerous, even when it's unpopular.
And that's a message that every generation needs to hear.
Absolutely. We need those reminders that faith isn't just about words, it's about actions. It's about taking a stand for what we believe in, even when it's hard.
And sometimes especially when it's hard.
Exactly. Because that's when our faith is truly tested. That's when we see what we're really made of.
That's when the rubber meets the road.
Exactly. And that's what makes stories like Bonhoeffer so powerful. They show us that it's possible. It's possible to live a life of radical discipleship, even in the face of incredible adversity.
And that's a message that I think we can all draw strength from, no matter what crosses we're facing in our own lives.
Absolutely. Because we know we're not alone. We're following in the footsteps of those who have gone before us. And we have the same power, the same spirit working in us that worked in them.
And that's a powerful thought to hold on to.
It is. It gives us hope. It gives us courage. And it gives us the strength to keep going even when the road ahead seems difficult.
Because we know that in the end, it's all worth it. The cost of discipleship is high, but the rewards are even greater.
And that's the message we need to keep sharing with ourselves, with our congregations, with the world, that following Jesus is the most important, the most fulfilling, the most life-giving thing we can do.
Amen to that.
You know, it makes me wonder, thinking about Bonhoeffer, is there a danger in romanticizing that kind of sacrifice?
Oh, that's a good point. Like, we don't want to glorify suffering for its own sake, right?
Exactly. It's not about, seeking out hardship or pain, but being willing to face it when it comes, when following Christ leads us there.
Right, right. It's not about being a martyr for martyrdom's sake.
Exactly. And, several of the sermons actually touched on this idea of finding your identity in Christ. And I think that helps reframe this whole idea of self-denial.
Oh, interesting. How so?
Well, it's not about losing yourself, It's about finding your true self, the self you were created to be.
Yeah, the self that's aligned with God's will for your life.
Exactly. And FPC Joplin, they actually drew on the work of Caroline Lewis. She's a scholar who focuses on Mark. And she connects Jesus's own identity struggles in this gospel to our own search for identity.
Oh, that's fascinating. So, like, even Jesus wrestled with who he was, what his purpose was.
Yeah, I mean, think about it. He's fully God, fully human. That's got to create some tension, some questions, right?
Right, right. Like, how do those two natures coexist?
Exactly. And Lewis argues that by understanding who Jesus is, we get a clearer picture of who we're called to be.
Oh, that's good. So it's not just about imitating Jesus's actions. It's about understanding his heart, his motivations.
Right. And we see ourselves reflected in him, but not just as we are now, but as we were meant to be.
That's powerful. So it's like this vision of our best selves, our most fully realized selves.
Yes. And that Christ-centered identity, it's not bound by our ego or our ambition. It's defined by love, service, sacrifice.
And those things, they become the natural outflow. Not a burden, but a joy.
Exactly. And that brings us to the call to action in Mark 8:34 to 38, because it's not just about, head knowledge. It's about doing something, embodying these principles.
Right, putting them into practice in our everyday lives.
Yeah, like getting out of our heads and into the world.
And a lot of the sermons, they really emphasize that. It's like, okay, you've heard the message, now what are you going to do about it?
Exactly. It's about moving beyond our comfort zones, engaging with the messiness of the world, being the hands and feet of Christ,
Bringing hope where there's pain, offering grace where there's judgment.
Yeah, it's not easy work. But as we said earlier, it's about redefining what winning looks like.
Our culture's definition of success is so narrow, so focused on material things, on status, achievement.
And Mark 8:34 to 38 just comes in and says, nope, that's not it. True winning, it's found in surrender. It's found in giving yourself to something bigger than yourself.
It's about finding fulfillment in giving, not getting, in putting others' needs before your own.
And I think that resonates with every generation, even if the specifics look different. We're all looking for meaning, for purpose, for connection.
We all want to know that our lives matter, that we're making a difference.
And this passage says you find that in relationship with God, that's where true life is found, not in chasing after the things the world tells us to chase after.
That's so good. It's like this radical reorientation of our priorities, our desires.
It is. And Mark 8:34-38, it points us in that direction. It's a tough path, but it leads to incredible blessings.
It does. It leads to life in all its fullness, like Jesus promised.
Exactly. And speaking of tough, one theme that really stood out to me in a few of the sermons was this idea of shame and glory.
Oh yeah, that's an interesting one. I saw that too.
Yeah, that tension between those two ideas, it's woven throughout the Gospels.
It is. Like in this passage, Jesus says, if we're ashamed of him and his words, he'll be ashamed of us when he returns in glory.
That's a tough one.
Yeah, it's a stark warning. It
Yeah.
makes you stop and think, okay, what does it actually mean to be a faithful follower in a world that often rejects, even mocks, Christ's teachings?
It's a good question, and a challenging one, because it's easy to stay silent, to blend in, to avoid conflict.
Especially when being a Christian is increasingly countercultural.
Yeah.
It's not the popular or easy path anymore.
Right, right. So how do we stand up for what we believe in? How do we live in a way that honors Christ, even when it costs us something?
How do we be bold? How do we be unashamed, even when it's uncomfortable?
Exactly. And I think it starts with remembering that our allegiance is to God's kingdom, not to, the fleeting approval of this world.
Right. Our citizenship is in heaven.
Exactly. And our reward, our true reward, it's eternal. It's not tied to earthly fame or fortune.
In that perspective, it really helps navigate those challenges, those temptations we all face. It reminds us where our true identity lies and what our ultimate goal should be.
Yeah, it's about living in a way that brings glory to God's name, not our own.
That's a good word. And it's a goal worth striving for, even if it means facing opposition, even persecution.
Because the shame of this world, it fades. It's temporary. But God's glory, that endures forever.
That's powerful. It really puts things in perspective, doesn't it?
It does. And I think it's especially important for, pastors and leaders to remember that, because you're often on the front lines.
Yeah, you're the ones people are looking to for guidance, for encouragement, for strength.
Exactly. And you need that reminder as much as anyone, because sometimes the cost of discipleship, it feels very real.
It does. But the rewards, they're even more real.
Ooh.
And that's what we need to keep emphasizing.
It's not about suffering for the sake of suffering. It's about the joy that comes from knowing Christ, from being united with him, even in our struggles.
Right. It's about the peace that passes all understanding, even in the midst of chaos. It's about the hope that anchors our souls, even when everything around us seems to be falling apart.
And that's a message worth sharing, a message that can change lives.
It is. It's the good news that the world desperately needs to hear.
It's the message at the heart of Mark 8:34-38. And it's a message that we need to keep proclaiming, boldly and unashamedly, to a world that needs to hear it.
It strikes me, thinking about all these different sermons, they all use different approaches, different illustrations, different styles, but they all seem to come back to this core idea of transformation.
Yeah, it's not just about understanding Mark 8:34-38 intellectually, like head knowledge.
Right.
It's about letting it change us from the inside out.
It's about that shift when we actually embrace what it means to be a disciple.
Yeah, when it goes from just like, yeah, I believe that, to, okay, this is how I'm going to live my life differently.
Exactly. And that process, that transformation, it's not always easy, is it? It can be downright uncomfortable sometimes.
Oh, yeah. We're talking about confronting our weaknesses, our selfish desires, letting go of the things we're clinging to, even when it feels scary.
It's making those tough choices that go against the grain of our culture, even our own instincts sometimes.
Right. It's like those sermons were saying, it can feel like dying to ourselves.
Yeah, it's that death to self. But in those moments of surrender, when we choose to deny ourselves, to pick up our cross and follow, that's when we experience the real power of the gospel.
It's like that paradox of the cross, Weakness becomes strength, losing becomes finding.
It sounds crazy to the world,
Totally upside down.
but it's the core of what it means to be a follower of Jesus.
Absolutely.
So, for those of us who are preaching and teaching on this passage, how do we help people get past those cliches, past the Sunday school answers?
It's a good question, because we want people to really get it, not just on a head level, but in their hearts.
Yeah, we want this message to come alive for them, to actually change their lives.
And I think it starts with being honest about the cost. Like, we can't sugarcoat it.
Yeah, discipleship is challenging.
It is. It requires sacrifice. It requires commitment. But we have to show them the joy that comes with it.
The freedom.
Yes. The incredible sense of purpose. Like,
Yeah.
when you align your life with God's will, it's not just about rules and restrictions. It's about discovering that His plans for you are way better than anything you could come up with on your own.
Oh, absolutely. And that's where those illustrations come in, those personal stories, those creative approaches we saw in these sermons. I mean, that's what makes it stick.
Right, because it's not just theology. It's showing how these truths play out in real life.
It's making those abstract concepts tangible so people can actually see themselves in the story.
Exactly. Because at the end of the day, Mark 8:34-38 isn't just an ancient text, you know?
It's a living word.
It is. It speaks to the deepest longings of the human heart. It speaks to our desire for meaning, for purpose, for something bigger than ourselves.
It's like this call to adventure, this invitation to a life that's both challenging and incredibly rewarding.
Yeah, it's an invitation to follow Jesus, wherever that may lead. And that's a message worth sharing.
Absolutely. And on that note, I want to thank you for diving deep with us today into Mark 8:34-38. We hope this has sparked some new ideas, maybe some fresh perspectives.
And as always, we'd love to hear from you. What resonated with you? What are your own unique insights into this passage?
Share your thoughts with us on social media. Tag us in your posts. We'd love to keep the conversation going.
Because this isn't just a one-time thing, you know? It's an ongoing journey.
We're all in this together. We're all on this path of discipleship,
Mm.
trying to figure out what it means to follow Jesus and make His love known in the world.
So keep seeking, keep questioning, keep following.
And keep sharing the good news with those around you.
Absolutely, because the world needs it.
Until next time, grace and peace to you all.